Okay, hopefully everyone can hear us. We'll get started in just a minute. We're going to give another minute for people to funnel in. And for those that are here, if you don't mind, feel free to type in the chat and let us know where you're calling in from today. We'd love to see where we have attendees from, and we'll get started in just a moment. Edinburgh, Scotland first. Love it.
Oh, I was just there 10 days ago.
Oh, nice.
Unfortunately, my memory of Edinburgh was a guy stole my golf clubs out of the baggage claim, thought they were his.
Oh, God.
Took him to St. Andrew. I tracked it with my Apple AirTag, and we got him just before he left to go play golf with my golf clubs.
That's awful and incredible.
And I'll give a shout out here to the Philippines, where I used to be the envoy and had business and still do business there. So good evening, Gabrielle.
That's great.
Yeah, mabuhay. I was stationed in the Philippines a long time ago, 78 to 80. So,
in fact, I'll be at the Philippine Embassy tomorrow night for an event.
Wow, nice.
Oh, no way. Nice.
Hey, yeah, with the Ambassador Romaldes.
Very cool.
Got DC here, Charleston, one of my favorite towns, Helsinki. These are all great attendees we've got here.
Don't forget about Portland, Oregon. I was just
Portland, yeah. Oslo, even, man, oh man. Tom, we need to go on a road show and visit all these people.
I agree. I think that's the next step here.
Yeah, I was in Buda, Norway, at Buda Fleece Station.
Uruguay, man, oh man.
Above the Arctic Circle in February.
Oh boy. All right, well, I think we're probably good to get started. So let's kick this off. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're calling in from, obviously. But welcome to our Defense Ops Debates live stream, Breach Lessons. I'm Tom Mersman. I'm the head of Federal System Integrators here at Rocket.Chat, and I will be your moderator today. Been at Rocket.Chat for over 3 years now and lead all the work across the Department of Defense and Federal System Integrators that we partner with. And we're very happy to have you all here today. So over the next hour, we're going to dissect recent security failures. We will debate what went wrong. Actually, Alan and Rich will debate it. And most importantly, we're going to hopefully extract some practical lessons that you can use for your organization today. So we do want to hear from the audience. We've got a large number of attendees, obviously, from all over the world, which is great. But because this is live, we want to keep the conversation flowing. And there's a couple different ways to do that. So in the chat section, you can drop questions or insights at any time. With the polls, we're going to have some short polls that pop up before each question today. And we do want to hear from you guys so that we can steer the debate in whatever direction makes the most sense for the audience. And lastly, reactions. You can use reactions to flag what resonates most with you, or if something needs a deeper dive, or if Alan and Rich say something totally wild and off topic, you can give us a reaction so that we can reprimand them. Myself and my team will be keeping an eye on all the conversations in the chat as well. So hopefully we'll be able to fold some of that straight into the discussion. But without further ado, let's meet our two debaters today. I'm thrilled to have two seasoned operators with me here. We've got Colonel Rich Gibaldi from the United States Air Force, now retired. He had 49 years in intelligence, from tactical collection to national level analysis. We've also got Captain Alan Oshirak from the United States Navy, now retired. He had 35 years in naval special warfare. He's going to be bringing a boots on the ground special operation lens to the debate today. And gentlemen, I don't think that high level intro does justice to your time in the military and your service. So Rich and Alan, if you guys could just take 30 seconds, give us a quick walkthrough on your background in the military. And Rich, you can start first.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Well, welcome everybody. So in my time in the Air Force, I worked in all phases of intelligence, targeting, signals, imagery, you name it, human intelligence. And also I was a squadron commander in Korea and a group commander in Air Combat Command in the United States. Had many tours overseas, lots of deployments, and sort of did a little bit of everything taking that to 25 years in defense industry work as well. And that's where I ended up when I retired. So.
Beautiful. Thank you. Alan, you next.
Well, good morning, Tom, and thanks again for the opportunity to be on stage with you and my colleague Rich here today. I spent about a third of my life, really almost half, in the military, all of it in the Naval Special Warfare community, the Navy SEALs. I was the commander of SEAL Team 8, worked at 3 special operations commands in the Central and the Pacific, as well as Chief of Staff at SOC-UR, former senior defense official, defense attaché at Naval Attaché in the Philippines, was an envoy there as well, briefly. Retired 12 years ago, and now in various lines of business to include security and other work. And thank you very much for having me.
Awesome. Thank you both. Thank you both for your service as well. We're ecstatic to have you. So moving forward and to set the ground here, before we debate the root causes, we want to ground ourselves with a few headline breaches. I'm sure most of the audience and you guys specifically are aware of these. But the 3 that we wanted to highlight, the first being the US Treasury compromise. That was where attackers wrote in on a stolen API key, giving them the ability to pivot through unclassified workstations. The next was the Discord leaks. That was where an Air National Guardsman posted dozens of classified Pentagon slides in a private chat, or not so private after that. And Rich, I think you even have some firsthand experience with that one. And last but not least, the most recent one was the Signal exposure. That was where screenshots showed the defense secretary discussing planned airstrikes in a compromised group due to an unauthenticated user being in that chat. And what's interesting is each incident obviously hits a different vector. You've got API abuse, insider threat, and app compromise. So the mitigation playbook is not and can't be a one-size-fits-all scenario. And so Rich and Alan now get to square off on which gaps mattered most and what controls should have stopped the bleed or even could have stopped the bleed. But we're going to do a quick warm-up first to make sure these guys are good to go. And we'll have a little fun. So starting with Rich, I'm curious, what was your initial reaction to the Signal leak?
Well, interesting that I had been on Signal as a user for 5 years when that leak occurred, and used it as an industry partner working classified programs, but never using that obviously for classified use. We just use it for internal industry communications that we wanted to keep out of the public, knowledge. And I thought it was ridiculous from a policy perspective that the gatekeepers for secretary level and presidential level meetings would not have checked who was on the call, whose phone numbers were on there, et cetera. So it struck me as something that could have easily been avoided if, administrative procedures had been followed.
Yep.
And one other thing, that was my first reaction. The second reaction was if this had happened in the intel community, and Alan can speak to his on the special warfare, we'd have probably been court-martialed for sure for some of the data that was, on that chat. So that's my first reaction.
Yep. Thank you. Alan, what about you? Slightly
different perspective? I'd agree with my colleague. I was dismayed, as I think many in uniform and out of uniform were at that level. A lot of people use it because many of us are on the go, and it is a secure form of communications. But critical with any communications, of course, is that you verify the user, you verify who you're talking to. You have to do that. You make a phone call, you're just you're hoping that the person at the other end is the right person. And when you've got an operation ongoing, as it was in this particular case, sharing details real time live, where people are in the air or in movement or maneuvering somehow, you cannot disclose those details. Signal, like any other app, can be misused or misdirected if you're not careful. But when you have something that is available in the palm of your hand and you're on the go, That is something that you want to be very careful with. It ticks the block where you can use it anywhere, but again, you've got to be very cautious on how you use it. So I think the investigation is still ongoing on how this is going to turn out, but I think this falls squarely into the category of shouldn't have, didn't, and should not ever happen again.
Okay. Well, I will say, Tom, that following on Alan's line of reasoning there, I think the government learned a lesson, because the strikes that happened last Sunday, obviously the OPSEC was incredible. And
Exactly.
so, we went to the opposite end of the spectrum to protect exactly the things that Alan was just mentioning. And the special warfare community especially is
and to that point, Secretary Hegseth and the chairman were on this morning, for those of you who saw the news conference, explaining the raid into Iraq. And there was also reporting that congressional notifications would be limited. So they are taking steps. So the rainbow after the storm is, it looks like they're tightening up their procedures.
Yep. Yeah, I totally agree.
There's always the temptation, especially as technology improves, to use capabilities like this, as Tom mentioned. But then it's the quote, talking around classified information, which is always a death sentence for getting into trouble, as well as letting our adversaries know what we're trying to do, and not using unclassified means, even encrypted unclassified means to do that planning and conversations.
Yeah, not using commercial applications like that are not meant for those types of scenarios. I mean, that's what I hear from our customers all the time as well. If you're going to be talking about mission priorities and things of that nature, you should be using a Department of Defense sanctioned product.
Right. Or something that's, you can use on all the networks, really, because the networks do bleed. You've got unclassified and various levels of classified networks. So something that is mobile, that could be used as a zero trust model or security model to span those networks, would be very beneficial.
Yeah, they're not talking about multi-level classification, but an ability for a chat capability, a chat app that can run in all those environments, both unclass and classified.
Yeah.
So people have go-to things. They don't have to use Signal or.
You don't have to think about it, right? You just go.
Yep. All right. Well, look, this was just the warm up. I can already tell this is going to be a great debate. So, Alan and Rich, are you guys ready? I think it's time to jump into the actual debate now.
Sure.
All good.
Cool. All right. I want a fair fight, no punches below the belt. And as a reminder, we're going to give our audience the poll questions first, and then we're going to turn it over to you guys. And the idea is we'll give you the prompt. We want you to answer fact or fiction first, and then tell us why, based on your guys' firsthand experience and knowledge of this situation as well. Sound good?
Good.
Okay, cool. All right, the poll question. So audience, you should see the poll question pop up now. I'll give you guys just a second to answer that. I just saw it pop up, so I think we're good. All right, so for today's first debate topic, fact or fiction, policy, not technology, caused the Discord, Signal, and Treasury leaks. And Rich, I'll give you the opportunity to go first on this one.
Okay. So I think firmly that it was a policy issue, not technology. We've talked about a little bit of that in the intro there, but policy is based on common sense, right, and good management. If you apply those things to the discussions that were leaked on Signal, they would not have occurred, right? If you followed procedures, as Alan was mentioning, authenticating who's on the call, especially at that level. So technology could not prevent stupidity, right? And trying to work around things. So I think, technology is a value-added tool, right? It's not the be-all, end-all to cover errors in judgment and leadership and management, or overcome bad policy or policy that's not followed.
Yeah.
So, it's not the main line of defense, right? It's something that helps guide keeping things in the right box, right? So over to you, Alan, on your thoughts.
Yeah, I would agree as well on this one, because here government industry is replete with tools, technology to do certain things. We have technology all around us in our vehicles and our appliances even, and a lot of us don't know the full extent of how to use it. What I see with information is that it does bleed across many different areas of classification, everything from day-to-day information, which is mundane, all the way up to, in this case, top secret. So, what I have seen with my experience in the special warfare community is oftentimes policy makers and decision makers have a hard time distinguishing between the hundreds of pieces of information and what categories they fall into, because they do create a story. So in telling the story, they may be unaware that they're disclosing information which took us a lot of blood, sweat, and tears to produce. So here, where you're transmitting information real time or near real time on a platform, you're blending a mix of that information which has come to your knowledge, and you're communicating in a way. But I'd say a good maybe third half the time, you're seeing a blend of information which does spill over into various categories in telling the story. Where we have the advantage is oftentimes we have methods to obtain that information, which a lot of other people don't. So this is where we have to be cautious on how we enable it and how we transmit the information and communicate it.
Yeah.
I think another
Go ahead.
point, another point there is data aggregation, right? So when you're piecing together parts of an operation, that, like Alan mentioned, this is unclassified, this piece, this is unclassified, and this is classified. But when you mix the two unclassified together, it may become a classified fact that can't be used on a thing like Signal, right? The Discord leaks, which you asked me to talk about because I have some personal knowledge, happened in an intelligence wing in the Air National Guard. And, a young airman was taking classified documents from the wing, right, printing out things, and then bringing him to a Discord, which is, I guess, a server on a gaming, online gaming network he was on, and to show that he had information of import and he was somebody, the gist is he was using and uploading those documents. And, I just reread some of that, thing on the open press, and they said, some of the things were on the Iranian nuclear program that he, minor things like that. So policy should have been able to say, he knew the policy that you're not allowed to take documents out. Now the security and all those things, again, they could have maybe helped with technology, but it's really hard to stop those things from happening. And, that was
And there's a training and an enforcement piece to this as well. Training in both the tools that you have and enforcement, and training on the policy itself. Oftentimes we were required to go through training, but again, when you're blending in dozens or hundreds of pieces of information to tell a story, in industry, it's the same thing. You've got a story to tell about your profession, your industry, but there's 2 or 3 or 10 things that are the secret sauce. Those are the proprietary information. So when you're protecting proprietary information in industry, it's the same thing. You don't want to give that up, but it's hard not to give that up if you're telling a story across the board. So you have to protect that in the same way. So a tool that can really offer that operational resilience, I'll say, that you can use that in a way to best enable and protect those conversations would be very helpful.
Yeah, and I feel like what you're both even saying is policy and technology have to work together in those scenarios.
Yeah.
And the technology has to be easy enough to use for the users and consistent across those environments, those classifications, because
Right.
user error is always an option in reality. So you have to have the right policies in place. You have to have technologies that back up those policies as well. Cool. Gentlemen, any last notes on this topic of debate? Take it as a no. Cool. Moving on to the next one, audience and attendees, you should see the poll pop up right about now. There we go. I just submitted my answer. So let's move on to the second debate topic. So fact or fiction, end-to-end encryption alone keeps adversaries out of mission chats and communications. And Alan, I'll tee you up first for this one.
I say fiction, and I've seen it firsthand. So you do have ways to get into just about everything. And for most communications and for most information, it has no real impact. But I have yet to discover a platform out that is commercially available, that is completely encrypted, that can't be intercepted. And I'll give an example here. You may be getting an encrypted message on your phone, but if somebody can see it over your shoulder, or if you leave it unattended, you're exposing it. I was on a flight yesterday, and the woman in front of me was doing banking on her computer, and I'm looking right over her shoulder. I can see it's encrypted, of course, but and she doesn't think anything about it. So, things, simple errors like that, where you have technology, but the user is not situationally aware. So while we have all these wonderful tools and an architecture to support them, a lot goes into the user training, into our piece, the ease of use and the user friendliness of a platform that does provide a useful interface for users to understand that, look, you're entering in information. It could be something very simple or something very mundane, but you still want to protect it. And the trend these days, and I see this a lot in my security business and with some of the geopolitical work I do, is for people to want to communicate securely, even for simple things. We all want our privacy. We all value it, but oftentimes I see simple errors in how people treat that information once they get it. They leave it on their screen, or they communicate it in other ways, or they don't protect it throughout the course of the relevancy. So I would say on this one, it would be fiction.
Yep. Rich, I'll let you step in next.
Yeah, I in this case, I agree. I think it's fiction. I think some of the things that Alan mentioned. So, we also have issues with our partners and our allies, right? So we can keep things together, but just, in an air operations center, there's all kinds of folks that are part of our team, right? Our joint force and allied teammates that we can't, do operational warfighting without them. And they can see things. There's also the interleaving of chat with voice, right? So you see something on a chat, you want to talk. I can't get on the secure system, or it's not working. So I pick up the phone and I call Alan and they go, "Hey, Alan, have you seen the chat?" "Yeah, what's going?" So there are different radio frequencies and stuff that are less secure than the end-to-end encrypted chats. And, in wartime, you tend to do what you need to do.
Yeah.
But that also, you got to gauge what the win-loss is there for protecting what we're doing. And I think also that, we have some systems out there that are not as well encrypted end-to-end as we would like. So some of our airborne communication systems, from command and control to strike assets to tankers to ground, control, et cetera, they have an ability to be intercepted. And we've got to be careful about how and when we use those systems, especially as part of an operation. So I think that's also something that can really bite you in the end, especially when I've been in air operations centers where we had operators with 40 plus chat windows trying to make sense of all that stuff. So there's where you could use a capability, because they're trying to synthesize that with their brain.
Yeah.
As the AIML, and can help users, that's a crying need and a requirement for operational warfighting, is to take the key elements of all those chats, distill them so they can pass that to Alan and his special, warfare guys to know. They only need to know exactly when and what helps their mission succeed. They don't need all the was. around that in a nice to know. They need to know, does the door open in or does it open out? You know, and all those other things that go with it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting point on the allies and mission partner environments too, because when you start to share information, you're also opening the door to other vectors for people to get that information. Because if you share it with an ally, you may not know exactly how they're treating that information too. But, you know, both of you guys are saying fiction here. I think we both probably all agree here. Does anyone in the audience disagree with Alan and Rich? Put it in the chat. We're happy to debate that. I did see someone also put in technology can't prevent stupidity. Ultimately, that kind of goes to your point, Alan, where you can even be on a plane like you're talking about and someone has their screen up. The technology a lot of times is not going to be able to stop that. So how you treat that information even once you receive it is very important too.
I would add one point, Tom, about the allies and partners, and I learned this firsthand working in with our NATO partners and allies, and I've been to about 2/3 of the world in the special ops capacity, and the various allies and partners we do work with in other countries as well. They treat their information differently. It's not wrong, it's just different. So our levels of classification don't necessarily match the same parameters as an allied nation might or a partner nation might. So once you share that information, it might fall into a higher or lower classification or unclassified, you know, at all. So we learned to be very cautious, and there are systems and parameters for that in NATO as an example, but it becomes very difficult to share the key pieces of information because one country may get it and say, well, we don't consider this highly classified, it's partially classified, which means we can share it throughout our network in a different way. So that's another consideration, is not everybody views the standards as the same. And understandably, each country has their own methods, rules, laws, culture, and so forth that they adhere to. And of course, that's what makes us great in working with them. But there are different interpretations as to how information is handled.
Yep, exactly.
And
Go ahead, Rich.
Alan's point, there's a worldwide network that the U.S. is in charge of, but is used by over 26 partners. It's called the Mission Partner Environment, you know, which sounds exactly like what it is, but it operates at multiple classification levels using things like chat, voice, video to share. And there's different levels of it to share with different partners, as Alan said, because they're on different levels, right? But they do see things differently and use the information differently according to their rules and laws than we do. And sometimes it's hard to know all of those who's got what, right? And then will that affect part of our mission by letting that go out on that environment, or do we have to do it a different way? So that's another operational kind of gotcha that you got to look at when you're planning and coordinating with your allies, because you know we have to use our allies for the most part to have any really successful worldwide operation.
Of course.
Indeed.
Yeah, and Kerr Scott one of the attendees even said a problem exists between keyboard and chair, which is exactly what we're talking about here as well. Makes total sense. Okay, gentlemen, I think we're good on this topic. I'm going to move to the third debate question for the session. So, audience, you should see the poll question. Should pop up any second. All right, so Alan and Rich. Fact or fiction, mobility and SCIF-grade security are mutually exclusive. Excuse me. Rich, you get to start this one first.
Yeah, I think that's fiction in a way that you need to be able to do things in both environments, right? Everything we do now is generally in some sort of mobility, you know, operational plane. And the great power conflict, as the government has been, you know, identifying the China-Russia proliferation, is really where this, I think, stands out to me, because we've had to look at a worldwide logistics network for fuel, weapons, communications, command and control, at the same time protecting our classified information using both fixed facilities SCIFs, which are sensitive compartment information facilities.
Yep.
And mobile SCIFs, right? And using all kinds of other things, airborne, shipborne, seaborne, undersea, et cetera, ways to share that information. So you got to work as an integrated environment. That's really key, because it used to be, it was just fixed things, right? But I think one of the things that, so Air Combat Command is the largest, U.S. Air Force command that supports all the other commands worldwide, and all the combatant commands as well on the joint, side. So about 2 years ago, they integrated a Fighting on JWICS initiative, funded it, and have fielded it now to all their wings and command and control centers to do exactly that, provide that capability where it's needed. So when the wing deploys, and maybe they're in support of Alan's special ops guys, or a small element of them are providing air power, strike missions, etc., they're now connected and don't have to rely on less secure means. They've got SCI communications while they're mobile. And this is also where you're hearing a lot of edge computing and edge-to-edge communications. That's where everybody is looking at. I'll let Alan add. I know he has tremendous insights and experience with this area.
Yeah, thanks, Rich. I would say that it's interesting because these days everyone is connected. We all have smart devices. In fact, when you see somebody with an old style phone, or not connected at all, you think, this is, I mean, even the older generations now are just as dependent on it. So what we've seen really in the last couple of years is that information moves at great speed, and we are all more or less tied to it. I mean, we're all on our phones, we're all following the news, we're all following the trends. We get alerts, everything from weather to politics to traffic. And SCIFs are wonderful, but they require effort to use. And I was in one 2-3 days ago, and they're painful. You've got to basically strip down all your electronics. You have to be cleared to go in. You go in to speak about a certain agenda or certain items, which are best discussed in those platforms. But everyone's got to be there. It's voice only. You're taking that hour or two or several hours out of your life to discuss that, and they are very good for that purpose. But you come out, and it's almost like you've been on a flight without Wi-Fi, or without, you just disconnected during that time. So I would say they're almost a thing of the past. The mobile SCIFs are okay because you can put them on-prem or on site, and come in and out of them, but still you have to pass through a number of barriers to get in and out of the SCIF. And then how do you take notes? You write it down on a piece of paper, but you can't walk out with the thing in your pocket, right? So everyone is then committed to memory. And back to our earlier point, the things you talk about in those SCIFs are behind closed doors. You're not supposed to talk about, right? But yet they're a critical part to a story. So something that can be used in a as a zero trust security model, and operate at the speed of lightning or thunder, or in a way that is so complementary to our connected world. Most of us are on the move. Most of us have limited time to get the information because so many other things are coming in which influence your decision making. So I'd almost say that the deployable SCIF should now be something you can put in your pocket and use in a similar fashion.
Yeah.
I would love to. The company that figures that one out, that Alan just mentioned, that will be a winning ticket, winning horse to ride. I think one of the other ones that is pretty, it's been around for a long time, but is a really big challenge in this area, is the nuclear command and control environment, right? Absolutely critical to our country and the world to get right. And you see Air Force One flying, right, with the president on board, but there are multiple other airplanes that other cabinet members use in the event of, God forbid, something happens, and we exercise these capabilities quite a bit. And I've worked in that environment, just like Alan's worked in the special ops. I did a bunch of that, in the nuclear command and control environment, and it's a total mixture of calm out, edge capability, talking to space, undersea, airborne assets, the nuclear triad, if you will. And that's really hard to match up while everybody's on the way somewhere, coming back from somewhere, and you're trying to get only the leadership, right, at the highest levels can launch those assets or recall them. So you got to really get it right, and it's a very tough problem. And as technology has advanced, it's been helping the problem, but you still got to get the policy right, the mobility piece together, and the classified. And they also have other classifications, above SCI, right, for these types of operations, just like they do in Alan's, environment too, for some of the special ops things. So you got a lot of things for folks to understand, but then they have to carry it out of those SCIFs, as Alan mentioned, and they got to be able to parse that a little bit in their brains. So if there was some technology, including a chat capability, that could help them do that and recommit back to, did Captain Oshirak, did he say we should do that or not do that, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of a pretty important, or the president said, or the SecDef, so that's another environment that is equally difficult to traverse in both those areas.
And along those lines, Rich, I can tell you that having done some of those missions myself, it ends up being a very rapid game of verifying the information that is coming your way, because you're getting ready to do something really sensitive that's going to have a strategic impact. And if you get it right, or if you get it wrong, a lot of it depends on the speed of information and verifying that whoever sent it to you is that person, and it is sent in a clear, concise fashion. And oftentimes you have seconds to react or seconds to transmit something back. So it is critical to have a methodology for that.
Yeah. And I know there were 7 people in the audience who put fact. We would love your input in the chat again, if you get a chance to type that in, and we're happy to discuss that. And Rich, you brought up Air Force One scenario. I'm sure we could debate the recent Air Force One gift potentially as well. I don't think we have time today, but that might be a good topic for the next session.
I'd like to be a fly on the wall for that one, though, when they're really talking about it. So.
Correct. All right, well, let's move on to the next one. I think we're doing pretty good on time right now. But attendees, you should have the next poll question popping up right now. Okay, looks like we're getting some votes in. All right, so fact or fiction, end user training beats technical controls for stopping the next breach. Alan, you get to tee this one up for us.
Yeah, I say that's pretty important. So I'll say that is mostly fact, because it's people, right? So people are doing these things with technology as the tools. And what we see in the military often is you are trusted to do a lot of different things. I can tell you in my community, we're always lacking training in something, because no sooner do you complete a training in diving, let's say, then you're out of practice on the range, you're out of practice in the desert, or doing demolition work, whatever the case may be. So training is always in deficit, and of course, technology progresses each day, and we're always upgrading. What you had last year is old. What you had 10 years ago is ancient. So the end user training needs to keep up, really, with the speed of information, and it's hard to do. On my phone alone, I've probably got 40 or 50 apps, and I'm sure most of our audience does as well. And all of these things require use, and I'll say that most of these apps are only used at 20 to 30% of their potential. And oftentimes you find out, well, I could have, I should have, I didn't realize that because they weren't easy to navigate or not user friendly. And the designer may not have realized that, the little button in the bottom that they thought was well placed is out of reach for some, or doesn't appear on some screens, or whatever the case may be. So we live in a highly connected world, which depends on what is increasingly interaction through social media instead of in person. So the training has to keep up with that. And since most of us are reliant now on what we see on a screen rather than what we gather in person at events or with personal interactions, that training becomes more critical. And oftentimes accessing that is not very easy. But I'd say that the better companies have that ingrained into their product or offer refreshers or methodologies to keep yourself up to speed on how to use it. But I think this is a good question, Tom. Rich, over to you.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely true. My experience is that training is really critical, but it has unfortunately been the redheaded stepchild, of defense funding. The thing you need most is just slightly ahead of the end of year spend rate on furniture, right? It's training, and then furniture is what you buy with your last dollars. And during Vietnam, we had a lot of airplanes shot down with surface to air missiles, and we couldn't get tactics right and things like that. And a lot of operational and intelligence lessons came out of that conflict. And that actually created something that we know now as Red Flag, right? Which is out at Nellis Air Force Base in Las Vegas. And the idea was, let's give our operators and intelligence folks their first 10 missions, not in combat, where the loss rate was the highest, because they didn't have all the capabilities to do that integrated operational execution.
Mm-hmm.
So let's give it to them in a training environment. So their 11th mission is, if it's in real combat, they should be miles ahead and seeing all the things that worked and don't work, and how do I talk to that system, and this thing didn't give me the coordinates correctly. And now we've advanced, obviously, light years from that to where we are now. But now we're using live, virtual, and constructive training, and those type of assets. So there are things that aren't really there, but they are as real as anything when you're in that environment. And how do you work to keep those people that are using those systems and technologies up to speed? As a commander in Korea, right, when the Yongbyon nuclear, thing was at high levels, and after the North Korean leadership had just changed hands, we had SCIFs littered with all these the next greatest technology. And I'm sure Alan got this, especially in the special warfare community, where they have accelerated capabilities to meet their really tough needs, right? But we had one of our 3-star generals come in and goes, "What's that box over there? Oh, that does this." Well, don't we really need that? Yeah, but the contract ran out on the training, so nobody here knows how to use it. And most of the people here are on a 1 or 2 year tour, and now they don't know how to use that, right? So it's like, you've got to be able to keep the mission environment up to speed, and training I've seen is absolutely critical to doing that. Back over to.
And you got to do it all the time. It's a perishable skill, just like anything else. If you're not out playing golf, for example, every now and then, you're gonna not be too good at it, and so forth.
Well,
So
in the Air Force, it was mandatory.
So, but with any skill, really, if you're not doing it, it's one thing from seeing it on a piece of paper or on a desk or on a screen. It's another thing to teach it, but yet a third thing to actually do it. And I ran into this in my community a number of times, where people could, at one point in their career, do a skill, but as the process has changed, they became older, less able to either perform one piece of it or another. We found that the physical rehearsal of the skill was critical. So the training is important, but you can sit and train all day long, but until you actually get out there and do it, that's the discriminator. Oftentimes I found people could verbally describe it quite well, but when it came to actually doing it and training your body or your mind to interact, so whether it's a skill where you're sitting at a desk, or a skill where you're out on your feet doing something, you have to actually do it. Then that's when you really learn it. So the rehearsal of going through it, whatever that may be, and rehearsals are hard to do, because you got to get out and assemble all the pieces, whatever they may be. So, and the technology plays a role in it. Is it waterproof, for example, in my community? All this stuff is great, but we found over time, early on in our early days, that certain technology didn't work when it got wet, or it got cold, or exceptionally hot, or a blend of the three. Some of it didn't work underground. Some of it didn't work in protected shelters. Some of it didn't work in electromagnetic heavy environments. And we're seeing that these days in Ukraine, where some of the systems that are being sent over are routinely being jammed
Yeah.
because they find you put a lot of energy in the air, it jams everything. And for people that don't know what that means your cell phones would be jammed as well as your microwave electronics. So this is where until you experience it, you don't realize how things that you assume are going to work quite well may not. On a hot day, for example, if something is impacted or the battery life is impacted, a lot of people don't realize that these things do have limitations, and the technology also in my community oftentimes is challenged in ambiguous environments, which are often remote. There's no nice 5G towers. There's not this nice internet connection. The power is not available. It's 24 hours a day. It surges in and out. Humidity, dust, uh, all those things play a factor. So we live in a highly connected environment, but that assumes that everything works just fine. And oftentimes it doesn't, particularly in areas where the infrastructure is not well developed. There's not redundancy in some of the networks and so forth, whether they be physical or technical networks in one way or another. So I say to those who want to really determine whether their product, whatever it may be, works, is get out there and put it through the test and think of difficult scenarios. It's not going to be an ideal day where the weather is great and it's a Wednesday afternoon at 2 p.m. and
Yeah.
everybody's happy and right after, and everything is just peachy. It's going to be typically at the worst time, the worst weather. You're probably going to be tired. You may not. So this is where the rehearsal and the training comes in. It should be second nature to use some of this stuff. So the training trains you to use this stuff when your mind is focused elsewhere. Everything else is basic muscle memory. And this is one of the reasons we, in my community, went through such extensive, really difficult training. And there's nothing like it, because when you get to that point where you have been through all of it, everything else is pretty straightforward. So you're not training your body to go, oh my God, it's too cold or it's too hot or we're
Yeah.
not sure where we are, we're lost. You're used to that. Now you're really focused on solving those 2 or 3 problems instead of those 10 problems. So this is where the training comes into play.
Yeah, and we had some interesting comments from the audience too. Someone asked, so it's about end user training and technical controls, which I think is basically what both of you are saying. But also you have to have the ability to monitor and log within these systems that are utilized. And Alan, I think you brought up a great point on these are contested environments a lot of times. So if the technology fails, the users have to be trained on how to handle that type of data or information, essentially.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's critical. And I'll use the case with Ukraine again. We send over these drones and they're depending on this wonderful GPS signal, and that's all great until they fly in an area where the GPS can't be accessed or the signal is overwhelmed by something else.
Yep.
So you can talk about that, but until you experience it and your product is, doesn't fly or is grounded or gets shot down or whatever the case may be. So you do have to really think through. In the Navy, we used to call it sailor proofing, not just from the user perspective, because oftentimes, don't forget, you're handed these systems or you don't have the time to train on them. And now you're handed a pretty complex system, and oftentimes simple is better. And this gets back to the user interface and the design of it. What a designer thinks may be user friendly, and you're operating this thing at night in low level or in a restricted area. And again, it's not going to be a nice Wednesday afternoon where the sun is shining and everybody is happy. It's going to be at difficult times or in a time when you may not have use of all of your facilities, all your limbs. You're tired, you might be injured or whatever the case may be. You have one hand or whatever. So
Yeah.
oftentimes we would train in very unique one-off ways. So that way, when the real thing happened, and if there was a glitch, then we'd laugh at it because we already had experienced those glitches. We'd throw them into our training. Very odd ways to train to it. But if you don't, and when you go to execute it, I'll use another point. How many of you have actually changed a tire? You know how to do it, but how many of you have actually done it, right?
Yes.
Very few. It's a pain in the rear end, right? So you got to get out. Where do you jack up the car if you're in a different car? So yeah, we say we can do it, but can you really do it? Can you do it at night in the rain along a highway? So
When it
it's a
matters.
when it matters, right? So let's say you're taking somebody to the hospital, you have a flat tire. So how many of you can really do that? How many of you have actually done it? So it's a simple thing, but it gets to the point of the training and understanding the technology and the platform that you're in.
Yep. Okay, that was a great topic. Let's move on to the final topic for today's debate. Attendees, you should have that poll question pop up right now. All right, Alan and Rich, fact or fiction, legacy systems can't be made mission secure. I don't remember who's first, but I'm going to give it to Rich.
I think it's fiction. I believe they can be made mission secure. I know we have made them mission secure. If for no other reasons, we can't afford, newer technology. We've got to make the things that we have in the inventory work. And this goes back to a little bit from the last question. Alan was talking a lot about mission rehearsal training. So if you don't rehearse what you're going to do with the systems you have to go to war with, many of which are legacy systems, while the other systems are in upgrade, or the acquisition community is doing as best as they can with industry, to develop the next great, chat application, for example, or a command and control module that works, from undersea to airborne to space. You got to go to war with what you have and make that mission secure. I think we have, and they usually end up being the bedrock of what we have, right? Because everybody, if you've used them and you've exercised and maybe you've already been in a conflict with them, the operators have faith in them that they're going to work, right? Just like that mission rehearsal piece.
Yep.
And I think it's critical to use, within our umbrella of capabilities, everything from, what we have in the locker to the bleeding edge, right? But the bleeding edge isn't always ready to operate in the environments that Alan mentioned. If we're lucky, it is, but only part of it is. So a lot of the systems that are fairly mundane, but they work. It's like the old flip phone thing where Alan was bringing up. There's a lot of things like that we want to have, but we don't have, right? And all the things like you've heard a little bit here on the call about AIML, 5th and 6th generation operational airplanes and technologies that go across ISR, operations, comm, IT, cloud, at the edge, and those things. You've got to be able to take them in the various states and have them mission secure, because that's what you're going to go to war with. And as we've just seen, on the events of the last week, you never know when you're going to, those guys are going to get the bell to go.
Yep.
Right? And you want it to go with what you got. You can't take things out of the lab, with a guy in a coat with a Coke bottle glasses and have him go with you in an airplane that seats one person, right? So.
Yep. Cool. Alan?
I think this is a good topic again. And I think, like fashion, legacy systems are back in vogue in some ways because they are harder to penetrate, because most of the legacy systems were not made with the high technology that we enjoy today, which means they can't be penetrated as easily. And what we've learned from recent conflicts, I'll cite Ukraine here, is that the standoff weapons with the unmanned systems are in heavy use and are the wave of the future. The cyber penetration and the cyber systems, which require a tremendous amount of training, are the wave of the future, and the informational narrative that goes with those. So the legacy systems are actually, in many ways, quite useful because they've typically been built to a higher standard material-wise. Materials are expensive and so forth. Think about getting parts these days. You're thinking, well, the manufacturer has trimmed down, they've reduced their costs, they're using cheaper grade materials for a higher profit or so forth. So at times, legacy systems are actually more valuable because some of them are better made and made to last in some capacities rather than made to be efficient or made to be lightweight or something, or another priority factor. So I think this one's a bit of a mixed bag because we've had the situation where the supply chain has been disrupted either through, recently the tariffs or the pandemic before that, and so forth. But I think each legacy system should be evaluated, something that can operate in all those environments, that can bring legacy systems to the forefront and translate and bring all of those together. A platform that can do that would be very valuable.
Yeah. Also, a question of how you integrate legacy technology with modern technology stacks as well. Rich, if you have one quick comment, I think our marketing team is pushing us.
That integration piece, how do you get it integrated into the current architecture?
Yep.
Because it's the one you're going with. And also, can you make it usable without having to take an analogy, make a wartime twister game that you have to be a double jointed circus family kind of a person to make it work, right? It's got to be actually able to be usable and connectable by the average, Joe that's actually doing the operation, right? So that's just one other comment.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. Real quick for the audience, if you guys want to stay in touch, by the way, Alan and Rich have been kind enough to offer their contact information. If you have follow-on questions, I am always going to be available as well. We've got all of our email addresses listed here. So please reach out if you have additional questions or even want to talk about how Rocket.Chat could help you with a lot of the scenarios we discussed today. We do work very heavily across the Department of Defense for these specific scenarios, which is why we had Alan and Rich come join us today. And in terms of what's next, you can follow, me and Rocket.Chat on LinkedIn to stay up to date on the latest in secure comms. Future debates, hopefully we'll have a few more, as well as company announcements. And you can also get a free guided evaluation. Our team just put a link in here for following me, as well as the link to the guided evaluation. But Rich and Alan, I just wanted to say thank you. I think you guys did great. There were no sucker punches. I was kind of hoping there would be for the audience, but I think you guys played very well with each other. So thank you for taking time out of your day to join us, Alan and Rich, as well as the attendees. And we'll hope to hear from the audience soon. I think that's it, fellas. We're good. Cool. All right. Thank you, everyone. We appreciate it.